surface, or some of them go back to the surface, and they gather spores on their antenna. And then they go back down into the anthill, and they inject or inoculate the chewed plant material with these spores. Well, naturally, this chewed plant material is pretty organic and funky, so it begins to grow all kinds of things: molds, mildews, bacteria, so forth and so on. And what the ants do is they farm this and weed out all these bad bacteria and small microfungi and organisms, and only cultivate this one fungus, which then converts the plant material into a usable sugar. So what this is it's a symbiotic relationship between the fungi and the ant. And the ant is getting an enriched food out of this, and what the fungi is getting is a cultivated situation where all its competitor organisms are carefully kept away and weeded out. Well, this is precisely, in my model, what is happening with the human species at a more complex level. In other words, by domesticating cattle, we have set up an environment that is very favorable to the growth and appearance of what would otherwise be a very rare deep forest mushroom. But because we domesticate cattle and clear land so to do, we have created a huge circumtropical global environment in which these mushrooms can reside. What they make for us is not sugar, but ideas. You know, something we need the way ants need sugar. And these ideas take all kinds of forms, and then we refine them. And see, I'm not sure if I made the point strongly enough in the Friday night lecture. I really believe that human populations that do not have contact with the psychedelic tremendum are neurotic because they are male ego dominated. Yeah, big ego. The reason I call it male ego is because women, by virtue of physiology, basically, are pretty unavoidably welded to the nitty-gritty because they give birth, they carry children to term, and those two things which are biologically dictated. There is also the cultural dictate that women are usually involved in preparing and burying the dead in traditional societies. So women know how weird it is. I mean, surely to give birth must give you a perspective that anybody who's never done it just cannot hope to have. So the male ego floats on this myth of separateness that no woman has the luxury of entertaining, because birth, pregnancy, menstruation, care for the sick, care for the dying, these are boundary dissolving activities that keep women close to the nitty-gritty. The male organism can go off into its own private Idaho, pretty much. Often what child rearing means is the simple act of impregnation. And then that's the contribution in many cases in primitive and modern societies. Death is something the women take care of. Birth in primitive societies, men are never present. And women do it alone or with other women, so forth and so on. So in in these Neolithic and Paleolithic societies, this tendency of the ego to tumorize and grow in individuals was kept down by a chemical regulator, which was the psychedelic experience. It was part of the food chain, and it suppressed ego, much in the way that drugs are given in prisons to suppress libido, because it's hard to manage highly libidinous people in an institutionalized situation, especially when it's only one sex is involved. So this natural regulation of the human species, by regulating this psychic function called ego, was disrupted with the invention of agriculture. And the hunting-gathering society, with its deep involvement in ecstasy, and it was these weekly or bi-weekly psychedelic orgy ecstasy picnics that people used to have, that gave way, and Weston LaBarre makes the point that ecstasy is not at a premium in agricultural societies because it's disruptive. That what is at a premium in agricultural societies is the ability to get up before dawn and pick up your tools and go to the fields and work like a dog. And if people have been up all night before dancing and tripping, and they can't do that. And so the psychedelic gods are replaced by cereals, corn, wheat, rye. And of course, at a very early strata in the Neolithic, you do get the emergence. I mean, Fraser is full of talk about the great corn god and Tammuz and all this. So we are living the legacy of millennia of cultural neurosis in Western civilization by virtue of the fact of the untreated growth of the cancerous ego. And we know this. It's simply that we assume there is no cure. We assume that it's natural to have ego and that it's somehow unnatural to suppress it. But wherever you have an outbreak of psychedelic use in a high-tech society, then you see refeminized, hang loose, communal, caring values come into prominence within the community. Somebody had their hand. Yeah.
One is, have you seen a difference in the way men and women react to psychedelics, given the fact that maybe perhaps men embody a stronger male ego than women on balance? And then my other question has to do with the role of kind of the observer ego when you're doing drugs, whether it's marijuana or alcohol or especially psychedelic. So I was just sitting here thinking that the reason that I don't take anything stronger than marijuana is that, as your experience, I mean, I lose myself even in a strong hit of marijuana. I lose my ego completely, and I mean, I guess that's just a different form of the experience if I don't get really fearful and paranoid, but it's easy to get scared when that sense of observer ego just goes. Because then I don't remember that I'm on a drug trip, and then it seems timeless and eternal. And then I come down later, as you were saying, the backside of the high, I go, oh yes, I just took some marijuana 2 hours ago. Everything's fine. I'll recover tomorrow. And so yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that and what people can do who maybe don't have a strong ego structure, whatever it takes to do these powerful drugs. I don't think I would be able to handle.
Well, if you don't have a strong ego structure, chances are you're not a heavy-duty male dominator because they're sort of antithetical. I think probably cannabis was a major ego dissolver, and that all these things have been used this way. And if that works for you, that's fine. I didn't take psychedelics to lose my ego, although people said that would happen. I never quite understood what was meant, but looking at it as a mass phenomenon, where you're not talking about an individual tripper, but tens of thousands of people, inevitably this feminizing of values seems to take place. What was your first thing?
Do men and women experience psychedelics differently?
I don't know if they experience them differently. I've never quantitatively looked into this, but my impression is that it's less of a surprise to women, and that they feel less of a need to do it. Particularly, I think this is true of cannabis. I'll bet that 2/3 of cannabis use is male use. And why is this? I'm not sure. Maybe women have too much work to do, too many obligations. I mean, the old man can sit and smoke dope, but somebody has to do the shopping and get the kids to school and pick them up and keep the insurance paid and all that. But women, I think, have a different relationship to it. Women are often shamans, and in fact, the best shamans in many cultures, if you ask the people in the culture, are usually felt to be women. Women are connected up to all of this stuff. Drug taking may not be a male enterprise, but history is a male enterprise. I don't think we would have ever gotten into it if it had been up to women. In a way, the women outsmarted themselves because they had not control in the conscious sense, but they were sitting in the front of the canoe when and then they invented agriculture, and that undercut their own position, because the vast repository of plant knowledge that had been the secret knowledge of women, it no longer really mattered. As long as you knew how to grow corn and a couple of other things, the vast encyclopedic data on wild plants became less important, and it becomes more labor intensive. And men, because they had evolved toward being efficient hunters, probably did have a physical edge on women in terms of stamina and an ability to, work with a hoe for 8 or 9 hours a day. Because what the women did when they were in their, in the prime cultural situation was they gathered, they looked at stuff and talked about it with each other. And this was this domain in which language then arose. And gathering is not hard work. It's just steady work. And it's lots of fun if you do it with your friends. And, the cliched notion about Aboriginal peoples is the women chatter, this phrase, the chattering of women in primitive situations. It really is true, I think, that women avail themselves of language much more than men in these pre-literate situations. The men are hunters, and they act like hunters. They're stoic. They hold it all in, literally. I mean, the larger bladder size of men is thought to be related to the hunting adaptation and so forth. So the men are stoic, they're holding it in. The women are information freaks. It all rides for them on information. Where do you find it? How do you cook it? What does it look like? Is it poisonous? What time of year is best? What soil is best? What do you combine it with? Is it good all year round? What do the flowers look like? What does the fruit look like? So data, information. How could you ever understand the use and location of 600 plants or more unless you had a tremendously evolved vocabulary for this kind of thing. Yeah.
A couple of practical questions. One, the physical weakness that follows substances like psilocybin, is there any way to prevent that?
Well, the physical weakness, these things take energy. I mean, obviously during the trip, energy is being sucked into the moment. I mean, a trip is hard work, even if you're just sitting still. So then there's going to be an energy debt. One way of assessing the toxicity of a drug, in the course of this weekend, I've named several ways, and they all need to be used together. But one way of assessing the toxicity of a drug is how do you feel the next day? Psilocybin, what I do when I take mushrooms is I usually take them about 9 at night. By 1 or 2 in the morning, it's usually past. And then I eat before I sleep so that I don't wake up in the morning with a protein debt. And that's very important. If you will eat before you sleep after a trip, it won't be nearly so hard to come down. MDMA, one of the things that's really appalling to me about it is here it is, this pretty minor psychoactive, and my God, the day after is tough sledding. I mean, for a hangover like that, you should at least have seen God, you know. Now, LSD, we said if you drink a lot of water, that cuts the thing. Yeah, vitamins are never a bad idea at any point in these things. LSD, which I said yesterday, was so effective at low doses that on that scale it appeared very non-invasive. I feel terrible after taking LSD. I mean, it takes me 24 hours to put it back together. The interesting exceptions to this, and the causes, you know, it always seems to cut my way in terms of favoring the ones I think are most interesting. DMT is again the anomaly here. DMT is the most powerful hallucinogen there is. If it gets stronger than that, I don't want to know about it. And 15 minutes after you do it, you feel as though you have never done a drug. You are down 100%, mentally, physically, spiritually. It just returns you to the baseline. Ayahuasca goes DMT one better, and ayahuasca is the only one that I know of that does this. And I maintain the reason these things behave this way is because they are so similar to brain chemistry, ordinary brain chemistry. Ayahuasca, you actually come out slightly higher than you went in, and it isn't lost. You know, I mean, you feel great the day after an ayahuasca trip, usually. I mean, it depends. If it's your first trip and you spent 8 hours vomiting, you're probably not going to feel so good. But if you had, if it was a ordinary ayahuasca trip, then you're going to feel much better the day after than you did going in. More connected, more alert, more energy. Well, this must have something to do with the fact that the constituents of ayahuasca, harmine, harmaline, DMT, all occur in the human brain. And DMT, same thing. Now, why this doesn't happen with psilocybin, I don't know. Psilocybin doesn't occur in the brain, but it is a very, very close relative. I think DMT is absolutely fascinating from every point of view. Why is it so benign? Why is it so powerful? Why is it so short-acting? Why is it so hard to get any? That's the $64 question. Believe me, every book on drugs that you will pick up will say it's easily made. You know, people are making. They ask you to believe that people are making it in their kitchens all around you. Well, I don't know. A recipe? No, not fun, but DMT, NN-DMT. I've seen it botched many times. The literature doesn't tell you that. I mean, botched, ruined. If somebody comes to you with a grainy, dark brown syrup, forget it. You know, that is not what it looks like. That means they swept the floor after they dropped the retort or something. What it looks like is it looks like orange mothballs. It looks like a crystalline, waxy, orange to pale rose to yellow kind of substance, and it's very aromatic. And if someone shows you a liquid or a stuff which looks like brown sugar or, you know, some mess, we were appalled. We got samples of underground DMT and ran high-pressure liquid gas chromatography on them. It literally looked like the guy swept the floor. And these people had actually done it. I mean, I wouldn't have given it to a rat, much less a human being. The notion of someone actually taking that stuff was just hair-raising. What you should have is a very, very steep spike at 620 nanometers. And what we got looked like the Himalayas, you know, just running around all kinds of stuff. There has been DMT around which was shootable DMT, which is the hydrochloride. And since I don't shoot things, I didn't pursue it. Although what people tell me, and this is interesting and something to bear in mind, is shooting is not as effective as smoking. People think that shooting a drug is the most effective way because you see it all go into your body or something. I don't know. But if you shoot DMT, it takes about 5 minutes to come on, and it lasts about 45 minutes. That's why if you read in the literature how long does DMT last, it will always say 45 minutes. But if you smoke it, the peak experience lasts 400 seconds, something like that. I mean, it's extreme. That's why it's so astonishing, because it is so intense and the onset is so sudden that it's more like something has happened to you rather than that you've taken a drug. In other words, it's, and sometimes people come out of it saying, you know, what happened? Have we done it yet? Or was there an earthquake and the roof fell on me just as we were about to do it? It has the quality of an event rather than an experience. And also it has the quality of an event because it does not touch the core observer. You are not changed. What's changed is the sensory input is changed. You are still who you are. You don't think you're God. You don't feel bad about yourself. You are exactly who you were before you did it, with the same set of concerns. But you have been whisked into an alien dimension, one you never had imagined existed or could have a moment before have conceived of. And suddenly it's 100% in place, 360 degrees around you. And then, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 10 minutes later, you're raving to your friends, and it's as far away as that trip to Majorca 4 years ago,
Can you make a major distinction between 5-methoxy DMT and NMD in terms of the quality of these?
Oh, yeah, they are day and night. I mean, 5-MeO DMT, some people like it. It's a feeling. Is what it's been for me. It's this huge feeling that kind of sweeps through you, and it's velvety, and it's hard to describe, actually. But the main thing that I'm noticing when it's happening is I am not hallucinating. And of course, the main thing that's happening with DMT is you're having hallucinations so intense, so three-dimensional, so highly colored, so sculpturally defined that it's more real than reality. And by that I mean, if you look at this room, notice how all edges are slightly feathered. There is, at all boundaries, a slight indeterminacy. But on DMT, it's hard-edged. Everything is just defined. Sometimes people say it's as though all the air had been pumped out of the room. You're seeing it with that lunar starkness and clarity, and unimaginable objects off the art scale, and entities. DMT is the only one of these psychedelics where I have seen the entities. On psilocybin, it speaks, and it's audio. On DMT, it's you see these things, and I don't know whether it's my personal mythology. For me, DMT is the center of the mystery. I mean, I fear it, I love it, I thank God for it. I wonder if I'll ever understand it. It takes a huge mustering of courage on my part to do it, because it just is so, we talk, change, transformation, other dimension. This is not talk when you do that. You just do not know the parameters. I feel like I know more about what could happen to me if I'm in the Amazon jungle than I know what could happen to me when I'm in that place. And after many, many DMT trips, I've finally been able to paint a picture for myself of what is happening in there. And what happens for me, and I don't know anybody who's done it as much as I have. I wish people did it more and talked more about it, because, boy, if there is a landscape where we need some consensus, this is it. I have been present when people did it, and they come back babbling about the same thing that I think I have encountered. They come back, and one woman said it was a carnival. It was a carnival it was an extraterrestrial midway. And somebody else came back and said there were gnomes, there were elves, and yeah, this is getting close to it. What happens to me when I do it is there's an initial period of kind of hysteria and confusion. It's almost as though time speeds up, even before you take the first hit. Many people say, just before you do DMT, there's this funny kind of impression in the room, almost as though there is backwash from the event about to happen. You're caught in the psychic field of this event, and everything is moving faster and faster. This is like the Q phenomenon. And then you take the hit, and it's building up in your body, and your heart is pounding and everything, and then you break through to this place, and what it's like is the first impression is of the first impression is of the sound of cellophane being crumpled. That crackling sound, as if someone had just taken a bread wrapper. Yeah. Crackle that cellophane for us. That's it. More of that.
Are you there yet?
Would that it were so easy. A friend of mine says that's the sound of the radio intellecti of your soul tearing out of the organic envelope. Which is what it sounds like. It sounds like your body has just been wadded up and thrown into a corner, and now you're a radio signal, approximately 4 light seconds in diameter, spreading out through an alien universe. And the next impression is of a cheer. It's hurrah, welcome, welcome. And it's them, and they're waiting, and they can hardly wait. I mean, there's a moment when they're not on me, just a moment, and then they say, "You're here, we're glad to see you, why did you stay away so long?" And then they come toward me, and the main thing for me in the DMT thing is to struggle not to go into shock of wonder, basically. I mean, because there is a tendency, a strong tendency, and for the first few trips, I couldn't conquer it. I was a victim of it. I mean, I just go into this. And I would say, heart, okay. Breathing, okay. But I'm looking, and I can't believe my eyes, because I'm in some kind of domed place. And the impression, don't ask me why, but the impression is of being underground, even though it's a huge vaulted space and highly colored. But what is, of course, riveting my attention are these beings. And they're small, and they're like, I've described them as machine elves. They seem partially machine-like and partially elf-like. Yeah, no, they are not so mundane as that. They don't have a fixed body outline. And in fact, that's one of the things that's going on in this space that's so baffling. They come toward you, they're singing in this alien language, which you somehow understand. It cannot be translated into English, but you understand it in that moment. And what they're doing is they are using their voices to produce objects. And so song becomes thing. And there are dozens of these things, and they're coming closer and closer, and the songs they sing condense into objects, and the objects themselves can sing. And these things come, and they're saying, look, and they're holding this stuff out to you, and you look at it, and you're fighting wonder, because your entire being is caught up in, this can't be happening. And yet they're saying, just look. And what these things are devices, toys, works of art, objects, but whatever they are amazing. And you look into it, and you can't, and they seem to be shifting, even though they're made of metal and glass and gems and pulsing. Everything is migrating and shifting and changing. And they say, look at this one. It's the most astonishing thing you've ever seen. And you just look at it and they say, look at this one. Look at this one. And they're piling up. And these things are coming towards you, and then they jump through you. They can pass through your body. And they're running around chirping and singing and making these objects. And what they're doing is they are saying, do what we are doing. Do what we are doing. You say, I just want to go back to New York. Say, later for that. And the implication is, and this is the mystery of my life, I'm teasing it out, trying to understand it, but the implication is, and the promise is, that ahead of us in time, 6 months, 50,000 years, is a visible linguistic channel of communication. That the thin channel of audio communication composed of small mouth noises is just a provisional kind of communication. And what is being proposed in this state is a true telepathy. Now, we always thought, or I always thought, that telepathy means you think, I hear what you're thinking. What it actually turns out to be is you speak, I see what you mean. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean I see what you mean. So that your linguistic intentionality condenses as a three-dimensional object in front of us, a sculptural modality. So then we both see what you mean. You made it, and I'm your conversational cohort, and we're both looking at your meaning. And we can walk around it, we can adjust it, and notice that no common dictionary is necessary here. If you're Witoto and I'm Polish, I still see what you mean, because what you mean is an objectified three-dimensional modality, not a string of Witoto words. So that, and it's saying, do this, do what we are doing. Well then, this took me about 15 trips to get this far. And then I began to experiment with sounding in that state. And I discovered that they were right. That is a 3.5 foot wide, 8 foot long, magenta curved surface with lime auras. And that shifts the lime auras into rose pink and adds gray silver pinstriping along one edge. And I thought, my God, what is this? So then when you break out into actual chanting, actually linguistically modulated sound, you discover you too can make these objects. And what they apparently are, how this could be, don't ask me, they are apparently syntactical sculpture. Sculpture made of syntax. Syntax suddenly becomes not the rules that govern spoken languages, but the rules that govern the assembly of three-dimensional thought objects. And as though words were the shadows of hyperdimensional intentions that can actually be broken through to. Well, my God, I just thought this is this takes the cake. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing. Nobody's ever suggested to me this is possible, so forth and so on. So then, as is the case with most things, if you look long enough, you discover precursors. And what I discovered in a wonderful book, and any one of you would love this book, I'm sure. It doesn't deal with the psychedelic experience by name, but it is a psychedelic book. It's called The Phenomenon of Life by Hans Jonas, Jonas. And if you can find this book, what a read. It's a group of essays, and one of the essays, he is talking about the etymology of the word Israel. And he says, following Talmudic thinkers, that Israel means he who sees God, that this is the actual etymological basis of the word Israel. So then, did I say that we're talking now about the writings of Philo-Judaeus? Yes. Philo-Judaeus, in discussing the etymology of the word Israel, says it means he who sees God. And then he says, what does this mean, he who sees God? Well, as you probably know, in the Hellenistic world, there was this phenomenon called the Logos. And the Logos was an informing internal voice that tells you the right way to live. It's like a spirit ally that speaks to you and informs you. So Philo-Judaeus said, what would be the more perfect Logos? And then he goes on to answer his own question. He said the more perfect Logos would go from being heard to being beheld without ever crossing over a quantized moment of distinct transition. This is precisely and in fact what is going on in these states. Because now I have learned or have found out how to evoke this DMT phenomenon in the more controllable environment of the psilocybin intoxication. And it happens like this. First of all, I form the wish for it to happen. I usually follow a line I learned in an old I Love Lucy rerun where she's explaining to Ethel how she contacts flying saucers. And she says, I just say, come in, little green men, come in, little green men. So on mushrooms, I do this. I say, come in, little green men. And what begins to happen is this sound like bells, like very distant bells. And then it becomes louder and louder. It's sort of like bells with wind. And it becomes louder and louder and more complicated and more complex. And at a certain very, very hard to precisely define moment, it begins to spill over into the visual cortex. And then I see the language and I can interact with it. Well, it is apparently a more perfect logos. This is what I had in mind in the back of my mind yesterday. Remember when I talked about how smoking was new to Europeans and they couldn't understand what it was? And then I made this offhand comment that it was a new use for the human body, only 500 years old. Well, it proves that there may be undiscovered uses for the human body. I mean, we've only been around playing with our bodies for 50,000 years, and we've discovered most sexual configurations and all these acrobatic things and amazing things that people can do, like make pyramids of 10 individuals and so forth. But smoking is pretty basic, and yet only 500 years old. Well, it seems to me that right under the surface of human neurological organization is a mode shift of some sort that would make language beholdable. And that if we could somehow kick over into this alternative mode, we would become unrecognizable to ourselves. Now, I realize this sounds pretty far-fetched, but you always have to have reference to context. In a universe where there were no people, that would be a pretty far-fetched idea. But the fact that we already possess language seems to argue that we are in the process continually of evolving new applications for our bodies. And that when language, spoken language, burst on the scene 35,000 years ago, which is most estimates, I mean, think of it. 35,000 years ago, people invented language. What must it have seemed like to them? It must have seemed like a miracle. Hardly anything sets you up for it. I mean, the difference between a 9-hour recitation of oral poetry and 3 chickadees on a line is quite a leap. And I'm suggesting that somehow there could be a leap forward in the communication dimension, and that this is, in fact, what shamanism is all about, what the end of history is all about, what psychedelic drugs are all about. We are edge-walking on an ontological transformation of what it means to be human. And the mode that this transformation will come in, it will not be political or technological. It isn't starflight. It isn't socialism. It's a whole other way of making our minds known to each other by being able to show each other our minds. And in psychedelic states, you can do this. Yeah.
You think there's Any relationship to the Australian Aboriginal belief that the world, that the forefathers actually sung the world into being, that the song, that concept doesn't seem too far off.
That's right. Well, yes, as you say, in our own tradition, in principio et verbum, et verbo caro factum est, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. That's the whole story. What we need to do is pass through this transition and make the Word flesh. In other words, objectify the Word. Somehow the Word, and believe me, I talk about these things, but the pictures are provisional. I don't understand how it could be done. I mean, I'm an engineering type on one level. Is it an acoustical hologram? How in the world could I make you see a concept in my mind as though it were hovering 3 feet above the floor? Is there a way? And I've noticed on psychedelics, and again, I don't know whether this is a false trail or whether this is part of the mystery, but I've noticed on psychedelics that if you get a candle, if you get a person between yourself and a candle so that you have them in profile and they are raving and you can see the candle past them, there's something coming out of their mouth. It's like, you know how when you agitate oil in water and you see the swirling oiliness of water, or when you're in a swimming pool with too much suntan lotion in it, there's this kind of roiling discontinuity in it that's fairly subtle. Well, something like that is happening for about 8 inches in front of people's mouths when you look at them under certain conditions. Maybe it doesn't need psychedelics, I don't know.